Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that completely flips conventional wisdom totally on its head. We're going to look at how a middle income country is somehow consistently outperforming global economic superpowers in the metrics that actually matter: health and happiness. Yep, we're talking about Costa Rica, and honestly, the data we're about to explore is nothing short of incredible. But before we get into the hard numbers, I want you to ask yourself a pretty fundamental question. Can a country literally buy better health, right? I mean, we usually assume that massive GDPs and astronomical healthcare budgets automatically guarantee longer, healthier lives for citizens. We tend to think wealth equals health. But the source material we're analyzing today suggests that this paradigm is actually deeply flawed. Okay, let's dive into this. Let's look at the ultimate bottom line: life expectancy. According to UN and World Bank metrics, Costa Rica's life expectancy sits in the top tier globally at roughly 82.9 to 83.4 years. That completely eclipses the United Kingdom at 81.8 years, and it absolutely towers over the United States, which, surprisingly, sits in the lower tier for wealthy nations at just 79.8 years. So how on earth is a nation with just a fraction of the wealth pulling this off? Well, to figure out how they do it, we're going to break this down into four logical stops. First, the Costa Rican Foundation. Second, society, trust, and freedom. Third, the ultimate health showdown. And finally, the Marcenes Health Framework. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Costa Rican Foundation. Because the secret to Costa Rica's success isn't some new fad. It's deeply rooted in a historical blueprint and some very intentional investment strategies. Way back in 1886, they established free and compulsory education. But the real game changer? That was 1949. That year, Costa Rica adopted its current constitution, granted universal suffrage, set up broad social guarantees, and made this absolutely unprecedented move. They permanently abolished their standing army. Literally, no military. They are one of the very few sovereign nations on the planet to do this. Now, what's really interesting about this is what they did with all that saved military money. Instead of buying tanks and jets, they redirected that capital straight into their people. Costa Rica spends roughly 1/4 of its entire national budget on education. That equals about 6.2% of the country's GDP, completely dwarfing the global average, which is just 3.8%. And the payoff for that foundational investment is huge. The United Nations Development Program explicitly calls out Costa Rica for achieving much higher human development than other countries at similar income levels. I mean, they boast one of the highest literacy rates in the Americas, and they maintain a far better record on human development and equality than their regional median. Which brings us to Section 2, society, trust, and freedom. You see, physical health doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right? It's built on everyday sociological realities. When we look at pure life satisfaction, measured by the World Happiness Report, Costa Rica ranks in the 12th to 15th range globally. That means they are consistently outperforming wealthy Western nations like the UK sitting at 23rd and the US at 24th. In fact, the source notes that Costa Rica's well-being scores align really closely with Scandinavian levels, just without the Scandinavian wealth. Meanwhile, a regional neighbor like Brazil, despite its massive economy, struggles with high societal friction and sits much lower, in the 38th to 44th range. A massive driver of all this happiness? Social cohesion. Costa Rica features upper-tier community integration and incredibly robust social solidarity networks. Basically, people truly feel connected. Compare that to peer nations like the United States, which, according to the data, tracks in the lower tier for social cohesion, characterized by pronounced economic and social division. But crucially, this social cohesion isn't forced through authoritarian control. Looking at Freedom House scores, Costa Rica scores a 91 out of 100. That puts them right up there with the UK's 93 and well above the US at 83 and Brazil in the low 70s. Costa Rica maintains an upper-tier global rank for open civic debate and press freedom. And this proves a really vital point. High societal well-being and tight-knit communities are happening alongside extremely high levels of personal liberty. Moving right along to Section 3, the ultimate health showdown. We've seen the historical investments and the happiness data, sure. But how does that actually translate into the hard physiological proof of a healthy population? Well, the health victories here are absolutely staggering, especially when you remember we are comparing a middle-income country to global economic titans. Costa Rica maintains low cardiovascular disease mortality rates that perfectly match high-income European standards. Thanks to robust public health prevention, their cancer survival profile sits super close to Scandinavian baselines, and they carry a moderate to low mental illness burden, again, comparable to Northern European profiles. And this brilliantly illustrates the real power of that societal data we just explored. Costa Rica's lower isolation metrics, their strong community cohesion, and those cultural safety nets, they essentially act as a protective barrier for mental health. In stark contrast, both the US and the UK face heavy, highly tracked burdens of common mental disorders. The US actually sits in the highest tier globally for the diagnosed prevalence of anxiety, mood, and substance use disorders. All right, final piece of the puzzle, Section 4, the Marcenes Health Framework. So how do we make sense of all these scattered data points? The education budgets, the happiness scores, the cardiovascular health? Well, the author of our source material synthesizes all of this into what's called the Marcenes Health Capital Framework. And under this framework, the author states flatly, Costa Rica is the most cost-effective system across the globe. This framework essentially proves that you can achieve astonishing health outcomes not by infinitely increasing a medical budget, but by optimizing society itself. The framework relies on 3 specific pillars working in perfect harmony. Number 1, social justice. We're talking things like universal education, equality, and robust social solidarity networks. Number 2, autonomy, which is reflected in their high freedom of expression and really robust democracy. And number 3, enjoyment of life, clearly visible in their top-tier world happiness rankings. I want to pause on this direct quote from the source because it really is the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Quote, "These 3 pillars creates incredible levels of health without increasing the health budget." End quote. Let that sink in. Incredible health is fundamentally built on a strong, cohesive social foundation, not just financial spending in hospitals. To drive this home, the source provides a very sobering counterexample. It neutrally compares the cost-effective, socially grounded Costa Rica system to the UK's hybrid health system. According to the data reported, the UK has invested enormous sums of money into its system, yet the health crisis there is described as out of control. The text concludes that simply relying on a hybrid medical system clearly did not work when the underlying societal metrics were fracturing. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away. Does throwing money at a health system actually work if the social foundation of the country is fractured? Costa Rica's data tells us a really compelling story here. True health isn't bought in a hospital. It's built in the community, in the classroom, and in the trust people have in each other. It's definitely something to deeply ponder the next time we talk about the true cost of health. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.